So welcome everyone to our Bruce Peninsula Farm Stewardship webinar, the first of just a few that we're running because we can't really meet that easily. And this is run by the Bruce Peninsula Biosphere Association, funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And we are very pleased to have Christine Brown from OMAFRA join us today to talk about manure. Christine is the Field Crop Sustainability Specialist, and she's the girl to talk to if you want to know about manure, because that's her Twitter handle. It's Manure Girl. She's a certified crop advisor and knows all things about nutrient management and manure, and also has a small farm near London. So she also has control of my screen. So take it away, Chris. We'd love to hear your presentation. And I'm sure, are you open to questions throughout it, or do you want to wait?
That's the best, because this is really a discussion. And my slides are just meant to cause create discussion, talk a little bit about things that that you're seeing or things that you have experience with. So I was telling Mel, I know a lot about manure. I have a background in dairy because I grew up on a dairy farm. Our little farm is a practice what you preach farm. I learned everything that you can do wrong. And even when I think everything is going right, something goes wrong. So it's just like every other farm. I don't have a lot of experience in the Bruce Peninsula. My brother and sister-in-law live just north of Durham, and they have some land near Lion's Head. So that's my experience with the Bruce Peninsula, really. So I was telling Mel, I'm probably going to learn just as much from you and from the discussion as you'll learn from me. But I'm hoping that through this we can just talk about some of the issues that you're dealing with, maybe some ideas, and we'll go from there. So some of the things that I thought we would discuss is, first of all, what nutrients are actually in cow-calf manure. What is the available nutrients compared to the nutrients that we measure in a manure analysis, and then what are some of the application opportunities for solid manure, especially in areas where you've got shallow to bedrock soils, because that takes a special management and makes it a lot more difficult. Also talk about temporary storages and what are some of the best management practices. So especially in winter, if there's a risk of manure getting into water courses, or you can't spread it in the manure, what is the best way for temporary storages? And then the last one that I thought we'd cover is just handling manure in yards. And here's one place where I really don't have a lot of experience, but we've been to a couple farms. We've seen a couple of really unique ideas, out of the box ideas, that I thought I would share, and then we can just discuss some of the why it works or why it doesn't work. We did quite a bit of sampling, and what we were trying to do in this study was to look at how much soluble phosphorus was in different types of manure. So in that process, we took about 10 different samples from beef farms and did it for everything, all the micros. So this is better than our database, and I thought I would just use this one as an example of cow-calf and beef manure. And if you look at the analysis information in the table, and you'll notice that there's some that's grass-fed, corn-fed, different types of barns. I don't know all the details just off by heart. I'd have to look them up. But you can see that with beef manure, there is a variation in the nutrient content of that material. Dry matter ranges anywhere from 19 to, I think, about 35%, 33%. Nitrogen anywhere from 1% to less than 0.5%. And those numbers don't mean a lot when you look at them, but we're going to go through what they do mean. And I'm going to use this as the average. So if I take all of this average and I look at dry matter, the total nitrogen, the ammonium, which is the very quickly available nitrogen, the total phosphorus, the total potash, the sulfur, carbon to nitrogen ratio, these are the things that tell me a lot about how this manure is going to react when it's applied to a field. And if I look at this and I look at the available nutrients, yeah, there might be 15 pounds of total nitrogen, but based on a fall application, you're probably only going to have 5 pounds available to the subsequent crop the following spring.
So Christine, when like you say soluble phosphorus or available phosphorus, does that mean like some of it's soluble, but some of it is like inorganic form?
Yeah.
Like I never get this. There's soluble phosphorus, particulate phosphorus, and then organic phosphorus, which I don't know. What is organic phosphorus? It's just bound up in organic material, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and so you see this with biosolids a lot. They always say, yeah, there's a lot of phosphorus in biosolids, but if you get some of those biosolids pellets, the treatment plants use aluminum or iron, same as what you were talking about in that Thames project, that ties up that phosphorus. And so it depends on if you've got a ration that uses quite a bit of iron or aluminum, you may tie up some of that phosphorus so that it's not as quickly available. But by the soluble phosphorus, what I mean is what we were trying to find out is if we applied that manure and you got a rain the next day, how much of that phosphorus would go with the water? How much of it would be immediately soluble and move with the water, as opposed to some of it that's tied up in the straw material or some of it that's tied up in the bedding. And generally what we find is about 40% of the phosphorus is available within weeks of application to a crop, to the roots. Some pig manures, it's a lot quicker than that. Some poultry manures, some biosolids, it might be a little bit slower. But generally, we've got most of it available in the first few weeks, and then the rest of it within usually the first year.
And so, like the iron.
Oh,
go ahead, Jer.
And that's applying in spring, summer, or fall. But that makes a big difference too.
It makes more of a difference with the nitrogen than it does with the phosphorus. The biggest risk with the phosphorus is you can lose some of it with soluble phosphorus in the water runoff, or if you get erosion or you get a lot of movement with the water, you can actually move some of that manure as well, and it will carry phosphorus with it as well. But with the nitrogen, it's far more based on timing of application, what season, for example, and how quickly it's incorporated. Those all make a difference. And so does, with the nitrogen, so does the carbon to nitrogen ratio. 14, that's pretty normal with solid manures. If you had a pig manure, a liquid pig manure, it would be 3 to 1. And that means, and the soil has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 10 to 1. So everything is always osmosis. You're trying to balance out the nutrients. So a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 14 to 1 means that the microorganisms will utilize some of that nitrogen to break down the carbon, but it's not going to take long before that nitrogen is returned to the soil. And so a lot of this would say, okay, when is it applied? If it's applied in the fall, I've got more time over that early growing season and maybe in the fall season for some of that breakdown to occur. If I apply that solid manure in, let's say, mid-May, it's going to take a lot longer.
I'm gonna play, like she's got actually a video to talk about AgriSuite, which is an app that she's been working on with OMAFRA, and it takes 2 minutes, which will buy us 2 minutes to get her back on the line. So
this is just a quick example of the manure calculator or the organic amendment calculator. And it starts off with just the regular field information, farm name, field name, area of the field, any notes that you want to put in. And then we go straight to the manure analysis. And so the material name, you can give it whatever name it is, solid, beef manure in this case. Notes, we can put down when it was sampled. And we have the option here of either database numbers or lab analysis, but I'm going to use the averages from the samples that we took last year. And those samples fall between the dry matter range of 18 to 30%. And we can add various other nutrients, not just phosphorus, potash, and nitrogen, but also some of the micronutrients, organic matter, which I've done in this case. So we put down the analysis results as we find them for the nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, but then also the micros, organic matter, sulfur, carbon to nitrogen ratio. All that information is valuable in determining how quickly that manure will be available. Then we go to the next tab, the material application. This one's really important because it takes that analysis information and puts the management details around it. So in this case, when is that manure applied? Well, if it's applied after harvest, or if it's applied in the fall, we can just select the season, how it's applied, how quickly it's incorporated. So is it injected? Is it incorporated within a few days? Or is it applied to bare soil, crop residue, or in the case of this example, into a standing crop of pasture or cover crops? If there's a standing crop of something growing, then we can check cover crops exist. That affects the utilization of that especially nitrogen, but also affects the losses. And then we put down the application rate. So in this case, I've just used 10 tons as an application rate. Our summary information gives us what is the available nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash on a per ton basis. And then also based on 10 tons, how much is applied per acre. And then we get little information icons. So with trace elements, it also gives us an idea of how much of the micronutrients we've applied, how much organic matter, sulfur, for example, zinc. And then in addition, also gives us an idea of what is that economic value. So there's a cost to application, but then there's a value to the nitrogen, phosphorus, potash. It just gives us an idea of what is that economic value after application of that manure that's been applied. That in a nutshell is what this manure app does. We can save this information either by printing it or by saving it as a PDF and keeping it in our records. And it basically gives an idea of what we've applied and how we've applied it, when we've applied it. This is part of several different tools, and so we can utilize this tool in the field calculator where we can combine it with crop needs and with fertilizer applications to get a whole nutrient balance.
Great video.
So is that 170 pounds of phosphorus to the acre?
At 10 tons, yes.
Wow, isn't that a lot?
No, not really.
No.
If this is just people don't realize, I think, how much nutrients get removed by some crops. But if you have, let's say, an alfalfa field, and you take off 7 or 8 cuts, so over a 3 or 4 year period, and if you didn't add any potash to that field, you could reduce the phosphorus soil test by 35 parts per million. Like a good yielding crop takes a lot of potash. Same with corn silage. Grain corn doesn't take as much. Wheat, if you remove the straw, takes a fair bit as well. So a corn, soy, wheat rotation where you remove the straw, it's probably close to 250 pounds of potash that can be removed with good yields.
That was
can be
potash,
significant.
or
That was potash.
Potash, right? Okay, not phosphorus.
Yeah, yeah. No, the phosphorus is not as high.
No.
The phosphorus removal, 150 bushel corn crop will remove about 65 pounds of phosphorus. Soybeans will remove about 45 pounds of phosphorus. And wheat, straw removed, is probably around 75. I'm guessing at that one. I can't remember.
Yeah. What about alfalfa? I have the feeling we never get it down. But
alfalfa doesn't remove as much phosphorus as it does potash. I'm going to say over that same period of time, it's probably about 8 parts per million that you'd remove with pretty high yields. On the slide presentation is the web link for it. But if you go to ontario.ca and then upward slash, or like you're going uphill, AgriSuite, then it will take you to 4 of the different apps that we have available right now. And so one of them is the crop nutrient calculator. So it will, if you say, okay, I'm in the Bruce Peninsula, I'm growing corn, and my yield goal is 200 bushels, and here's my soil test values, it will give you, here's what your crop recommendations are, here's what that crop's going to remove. And if you do that for each one of the crops in your rotation, you get an idea of what is the nutrient removal over that rotation period.
Wow.
And then I
Okay.
guess the other thing to keep in mind is it takes about 35, this is not exact numbers, but roughly 35 pounds of P2O5 phosphorus to increase or decrease a soil test by 1 part per million. And for potash, it's about, give or take, 20 pounds of K2O to increase or decrease a potash soil test.
Mhm.
So those are just rough guidelines, but it gives you an idea of how quickly am I drawing down the nutrients in a field, or how quickly am I building them up again. And in my own case at home, we've drawn down the nutrients over the past number of years with higher yields than didn't think about what we were taking out. And so as a result, my soil test levels are embarrassingly low. And it takes
Yeah,
it takes a lot of money to start building them again with manure and with fertilizer.
I keep quiet about mine. I had it sampled I forget, it was that, grid sampling. Very embarrassing.
Well, my lowest one that we've seen so far is like 7, and it's like that's for phosphorus. It's and we're putting on manure every chance we get, and we're putting on, but anyway, it takes a long time. Now, having said all that, I can have a low phosphorus soil test, but if I've got good soil health and good nutrient cycling, I'm not going to see deficiencies too quickly.
Mhm.
So there's a balance between soil health and nutrient cycling and where your soil test levels need to be. But the ideal for phosphorus to me would be in that 15 to 20 range, because then you've got wiggle room.
So I did see a report that indicated most cash crop farms over the last 2 decades are declining a bit in phosphorus. Most livestock farms on average are increasing in phosphorus concentration, soil phosphorus, I guess.
Yeah, I know, and I'm not sure I would say that livestock farms are increasing. I think they're starting to do a lot better job of moving the nutrients to all their fields instead of just the fields beside the storage. But definitely the fields beside the storage are pretty high soil fertility levels.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll just move into and keep on with the discussion. If we don't get done the whole thing, that's fine. But just when we're applying manure, and especially solid manure from an environmental perspective there's less risk with solid manure than there is with liquid manures. But that doesn't mean there's no risk. And so when we talk about applying manure, really the bottom line is the 4 R's: the right source, the right rate, the right time, the right place. And I'm going to add a 5th one, the right storage. And because that's important, and it's important especially in, I'm going to say in cow-calf farms and beef farms where there's limited resources for fancy storages and for application equipment. And that's not true in every case, but I would say that most of the winter application complaints come from dairy farms, and most of it comes with applying solid manure. But we probably get the most pushback from beef farms. So the 4 R's, the right source is obviously not one that we can talk a lot about when it comes to a farm that produces its own manure. But there is differences in source even in the bedding that gets used. And the bedding that gets used will affect carbon to nitrogen ratios for sure, but it'll also affect how much dry matter and how much water absorption capacity some of these manures have. The right rate, if you've got cattle that are winter pasturing outside, your rate is going to be determined by how good a job they do moving around the field and spreading their own manure. But if you're spreading it with a box spreader or some type of equipment, then calibrating and knowing what rate is being applied so that you can supplement with fertilizers is very important. Because if you don't know what nutrients are being applied, then it's pretty tough to know how much additional fertilizer is economical and is environmentally ideal. The right time and the right place, we're going to get into that in the next slide, but timing is mostly how good a job can we do to get that manure as close to a growing crop as possible. I don't like talking about winter application and all the reasons we shouldn't do it. I would rather talk about why it's such a great idea to apply it to a growing crop or just ahead of a growing crop, because there's just so much more activity in the soil that utilizes those nutrients. And then the placement is more about how is it placed from a incorporation standpoint? Is it mixed in the soil profile? Is it spread on top? But then also uniformity of that spread. And you can see in this picture, this was not too far from my place. This is, I can take a picture like this almost every year. And I would hate to have the plastic sheets on the field trying to measure what the application rate is, because some of those clods would be pretty heavy to move.
Yeah, that's the problem over here too.
Huh.
Those are big manure spreader clods.
They
Yeah.
are, and I actually was in Thunder Bay one time, and they were talking about this very thing, and they had a really unique solution, and it's not a solution that's going to work everywhere, but this is obviously pen pack manure, and what they did at a couple of the farms in Thunder Bay is they took that pen pack manure in, I'm going to say February, March, April, and they took it to a field, to the edge of a field that was in forage, and they were going to spread that manure to that field after a cut of hay. And so they took it with the spreader, with a box spreader just like the one in this picture above. They used the box spreader to put it into that pile, and by moving the manure, putting it through, aerating it into that pile, caused some partial composting to occur between the time that it was put into the windrow and the time it was applied. And so by the time it was applied in June, after forage cutting, it was a lot more like corn silage in handling than these kind of clods. It wasn't a perfect application, but it was a lot better than this. And that was that farm's solution to trying to get a better uniform application, a better spread pattern. That was just one idea. The other thing that they really discussed a lot was, it wasn't about how old the equipment was or how new the equipment was. A lot more of it had to do with the maintenance of that equipment. And so if you've got the beater bars on an old box spreader, it was extremely important to them to keep those blades sharp. That if you had sharp blades, an old spreader could do just as good a job as a new spreader. The other thing that they really emphasized was all that baler twine that gets stuck around the beater bars, making sure that was removed on a regular basis, because the flow through just improved that much more. So they just really emphasized that the maintenance of the equipment was just as important as how new it was.
So Christine, when you're talking about application of manure and you talk about rate, like you've got 3 nutrients in manure. And so it's not like you can say, well, I got the right rate of all 3 right now.
No, that's a really good point. And just to include a comment that I meant to make before, we talk a lot about the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potash, but and we talk about the value from a nitrogen, phosphorus, potash equivalent, but the organic matter and some of the micronutrients are also very important. And they're not going to determine the application rate, but they do add value. When it comes to application rate, and I think we'll go to the next slide. So maybe I'll let you do it. Yeah, that's good. So when it comes to application rate, most of the time we have to do that application on, it's not going to be on nitrogen. It's probably going to be more on phosphorus. And the reason I say that is, even with the nitrogen, we never recommend that 100% of a crop's nitrogen needs goes on, especially corn, goes on with manure, because That's how we would build too much phosphorus. And just because of availability of that nitrogen, if you put 100% of a corn crop's nitrogen needs on with beef manure, you would be putting on a huge rate, and probably you wouldn't have enough of it available for that corn crop to get maximum yields. So the ideal is to have somewhere around that 2/3 of nitrogen from manure and then the rest from commercial sources. And usually that's pretty close to meeting the phosphorus needs as well. Sometimes a little bit over, sometimes a little bit under, depending on the analysis.
So you sort of go with phosphorus.
Yeah. Yeah, that has tended to get us into less problems than looking at nitrogen. In the States, they often will put on based on nitrogen, but they have a lot more huge lagoons, like 2 million gallon lagoons. So they've got a lot more nitrogen in the ammonium form, less in the organic form. When we're talking about cattle manure, we're talking probably 75% of it is as organic nitrogen, which is like a slow release nitrogen. And so you get maybe 20% in the first year, 10% the next year, 5%. Like, it's a slow release. Not all of it's feeding the crops. Some of it's going to be feeding the microorganisms, but we don't credit 100% of the total nitrogen from solid manure because it's just not there for when the crop needs it. So the other one that we look at is composition, and so how much bedding is in it, how thick is that manure. If we've got manure that's that we can put into a temporary storage, composition is a big part of that, but it gives you that extra option. Rotational grazing. I don't know how many of the beef farms in the Bruce Peninsula use rotational grazing, but it would definitely help with the manure distribution throughout the whole field as opposed to just around the feeding stations or under the trees. The other thing with rotational grazing, and it's a question I get a lot, and it's okay, if you're getting manure applied to forage and then you get regrowth, am I going to have a problem with diseases or with worms or with some of those kind of things? And the UV light kills a lot of the diseases. I'm not going to say everything, and then your regrowth is better. So I don't think it has a big issue for grazing when you go in next time, even if there are manure patties there. Some people will go over with airway, but I don't really think that that's doing a lot. And then the other one is fencing creeks, low-level crossings, supplemental water, which John, you already talked about, and outside supplemental feeding. I knew I should have written a little bit more because now I think that was outside supplemental feeding, cover crops, yep. Corn stalks like you've got here. You've got some people that will let their cattle graze on corn stalks. The fencing is a big one because if you've got meandering creeks and you've got ice flows that take out the fences, that's one issue. Moving the fences, there's a lot of issues with it. You'll see in the picture that I've got just above, there's a creek. In the bottom, you see the cattle in that creek. This was at Upper Thames. It's Halls Creek. They fenced the pasture so that the cattle couldn't get in the creek. They did a little bit of shaping of the water course, and 10 years later, that picture above the cattle is what it looked like, and the water quality was obviously a lot better. It's easier said than done because most creeks, it's not a nice straight line. It's a meandering, and it's a lot of work putting in fences. So I don't have the right solution. I just know that that's what we always recommend. Supplemental water, you've got the solar paneled ones. Some people will have just a spot on the creek where cattle can drink, like at a low-level crossing. Mel, you had an example of somebody that used something really innovative.
Well, it was just at our tour after Peter's farm. We looked at a culvert that they cut out holes so that the cattle could access the water as it's flowing through the culvert as like a trough of fresh water. Yeah, very
I
low
thought there were
tech.
some pretty cool, yeah, I thought there were some pretty cool photos. I was
Yeah.
gonna say I couldn't make it.
Yeah, we missed you, John.
Pretty simple, but it worked good.
Yeah,
And sometimes the simple solutions are the best.
Actually, always the simple solutions are the best.
That's true.
That's what Einstein said anyway.
yes.
Yeah.
You know about grazing.
He did it. Maybe he didn't.
Anyway, there's it's always easier said than done, and so we're giving ideas. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide.
Oh,
So
yeah, here's the issue.
yeah, here's the issue. Here's the issue for on this map that's in the middle of this picture. It shows where you've got shallow to bedrock soils, and the purple is basically the shield, and then the brown spots, and you've got some around the Niagara Peninsula, and then you've got some around the Bruce Peninsula. That's all part of the escarpment. And then you've got some around Kingston, and I don't know where that other place is. Barrie, maybe? No, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that is.
Hey, it looks like we're pretty good on the peninsula, actually. There's not much that Paleozoic area.
Looks good.
Well, but it gets a lot better up on the northern peninsula. Is that right, guys?
No, I think they just gave up once they got up to the peninsula.
Stop mapping it. Okay.
If I was coloring, I'd just quit there too. Just color the whole thing yellow.
So you'd say it's all really shallow to bedrock.
No, that wouldn't be entirely accurate. But there should, I think there should be some yellow up there.
Yeah.
I think it's at least 70% or whatever.
Yeah.
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 But what it says is there's some unique challenges.
Yeah.
And it's and so more than in other parts of the province, it's that balance of environmental protection with still being able to get the job done. And so what we did a couple years, this is when the nutrient management regulations were first coming into place. And you can go to the next slide, Mel.
It was a while ago, Chris.
I know.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that one. So we, at one point, they were looking at putting regulations into place for application onto shallow bedrock soils. And then they decided, no, forget the regulations, but let's make it guidelines, because some people have absolutely no idea where to start. And so this just says, okay, this is a guideline. And basically where you've got less soil and the bedrock is closer to the surface, you can't apply as much manure as if you've got 3 feet of topsoil. And so we just thought we'd put it into a little bit more black and white for guidelines. And so the numbers aren't exact, the numbers are just guidelines. And basically with liquid manure, if you've got less than 6 inches of soil and you've got fissures and you've got a pathway going straight to groundwater, then really liquid manure application is not a good idea. With solid manure, that application when it's a wet part of the season, so from October to March, it's recommended that you don't have application. But if you've got crops growing and you've got incorporation of some of those nutrients, then a lower rate from June to September, that's going to be your optimum timing. If you've got a little bit deeper topsoil, then pre-tilling or a little bit higher application is possible. 20 tons, for example, with solid manure, pre-tilling and 3,500 gallons of liquid manure. And so basically what this is saying is as you get more topsoil, you've got a little bit more wiggle room with application rates. Pre-tilling is probably still a good idea to break any of those macropores to try and get as much of mixing and uniform application in the soil that's there. But in reality, it's more risky.
Hmm.
So this is
Yeah.
just guidelines.
Any questions?
No, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of pre-till as a way of breaking up the macropores, but I guess that's the pathway, isn't it?
Yep.
In the case.
Mhm.
Yeah, matrix flow is not the issue as much as root channels, worm channels, and then cracks in the soil if there's any kind of clay in it. And so if you've got cracks in the soil in the Bruce Peninsula and you're going to put manure on, I would say pre-till is a no-brainer. So temporary storages I think are going to be more and more common, especially for that winter period. And as much as I don't like talking about don't spread in winter, I do like the idea of trying to decide ahead of time where is a good spot for that temporary storage. And ideally, if there's a cement pad, an old bunker, that's the obvious first place where you could store manure and deal with the runoff to make sure it doesn't go right into a creek or whatever. But the cement pad is going to help prevent some of that movement of nutrients. But if you're looking at an infield storage, what are some of the considerations? And so this is, again, is one where there were some guidelines put together. And the next slide should give some of them. Perfect. So one of them is how solid is the manure? So if you're moving manure with the pitchfork and the manure goes right through the pitchfork, well, obviously it's not going to be a very stable manure to put into a solid pile in a temporary storage, especially if you get any kind of rainfall during the winter. So dry matter content is important, and the higher the dry matter content, the better it is for temporary storage. Another consideration is the nutrient concentration. So if I have horse manure with a lot of bedding, or I have beef manure with a lot of bedding, I'm not going to have the same risk of nutrient loss as if it was broiler manure, for example, with bedding, because it's just that much more concentrated with nutrients. And so if I start getting nutrient movement, I've got a lot of nutrients there. Another one that's really important, I don't know if this is an issue in the Bruce Peninsula as far as tiles go, but it would be on the depth to bedrock. And you'd be looking at, okay, where do I have the highest topsoil? Where do I have less field tile? There really needs to be more than 10 feet between the pile and the tile. And
Must be
again,
the top of the pile then.
pardon?
That's the top of the pile then, otherwise it doesn't work.
Well, yeah, well, and then the other one is the soil texture. So if it's a sandy soil and it's got less risk of leaching, or if it's a shallow to bedrock soil and you've got the potential for preferential flow, it may mean putting a plastic sheet or something that's heavier than just normal plastic underneath of it to try and mitigate any kind of leaching or preferential flow.
Could you wrap it the way you wrap like round bale silage, or put it in one of those big ag bags?
Well, that's what they do with biosolids pellets. So there's probably some where you could do that, or there's some where you could cover it with plastic afterwards. Covering it with plastic is not as easy as it sounds, because
it's a very evocative thing when you say cover manure with plastic. This makes me not want to do it.
Yeah, no, and there's been some research done on piles, and does the manure, does the water infiltrate into the pile and move down through the pile, or does it run off the top of the pile? And most of the research that was done said that you got almost a hard layer, like a solid layer at the top of the pile, and so you got water moving off that pile without taking a lot of nutrients with it, which that was reassuring. I'm not going to say zero.
In my opinion, the runoff from cement yards are poor level bunks or whatever are worse than piles in the field.
I wonder if that could be true, because it makes a concentrated flow, and
Yeah.
Like, what if you were to take your pile? So just kind of thinking out loud, but what if you put straw on top of your pile, like as if you put a thatched roof on.
I think that would help.
I wonder if it would shed the water.
It would it sheds water even with the manure, because you get a hard layer where the water runs off. That was the research. It was SRG that did that research, Mel. Don King's group.
Okay, yeah.
But it's something that in a field where you've got soil and you don't have those concentrated flows, that you're right, that's definitely an advantage. Generally, where you've got some of these piles though, you're going to have limited, I'll say less, and I don't know if it's because of compaction or because of nutrient concentration, but you'll have less crop growing underneath of where that pile was.
Yeah, it's very brutal, right where the pile was, and all the ruts that are around it.
Yeah, it's mostly compaction. But I think it's a good idea to figure out in the fall or even this time of year, where is the best place to put these piles. The other one is distance to neighbors. We get a lot of complaints every year, and usually the complaints are people just don't like it so close, or they don't like the smell or whatever. Oh yeah, so especially if the pile's going to be there into the spring until, let's say, after wheat harvest or whatever, it's not only the odor, it's also the flies that sometimes cause complaints from neighbors.
Yeah.
So our recommendation is about 500 feet, or basically a 5-minute walk from where the pile is to where a water source or neighbors are. And again, it depends a little bit on the lay of the land and direction of the wind and all those kind of things. But you don't want to piss off the neighbors.
No.
And then the last question, and in the guidelines that are in the nutrient management software, it'll be in the new software too. But there's a whole list of questions, and each answer to the question gives you a number of days of, okay, how long can this storage be there without causing increased risk? And so the higher the dry matter content, the more bedding that's in it, the less tile, the farther from neighbors, like all those things add days. And so if you've got the safest type of manure possible, you might be able to store that manure in a temporary pile for over a year. Where if it's a highly concentrated manure, lower in dry matter content, it might be just 30 days, 60 days. So there is how temporary is temporary based on what type of manure and some of the field conditions. And there's a fact sheet on that, but there's also in the nutrient management software, if you go to treatments, it will give you an idea of what is the storage length for the manure that you're working with.
Okay.
So then the last section is yards. And like I said before, I don't have a lot of experience with handling manure on yards, but I do want to show you an example that we visited last year that was pretty cool. And so in this picture, there's a lot of barns. This is a Mennonite farm not too far from Alma. So on the right-hand side is beef barn, and they've got the barn, but you can see some slatted barn board, and so that's kind of the yard that they've put a roof on, and not a full roof, just a roof that protects it from the sun and a little bit of the elements. The gray barn that's kind of in the middle is a poultry barn. And then what you see on the left was a manure storage, a liquid manure storage that they've converted to a solid manure storage. And so, can you go to the next slide, Mel? So this is the before. So this is an aerial view of the farm. And the before, you can see those barns. The cattle barn is the one with the green roof and part of the gray roof. Then you've got the poultry barn, that's the silver building, the manure storage, and then where the arrow is a creek. So needless to say,
Very close.
Very, very close. And you can see the yard. And so the farmer in this scenario did something really innovative. And he decided, okay, I don't really, with broiler manure and with, I don't know if it's broiler manure or layer, I can't remember. But with beef manure and with poultry manure, I don't really need a liquid storage. And so what he did, if you can press, yeah, there. So this one's not quite as clear, but this is the after picture. And so where the manure storage is, he didn't take the manure storage out, but he put a roof over top of that manure storage. And now if you can go back a couple slides, Mel,
Back to this one so you can see it.
to that one.
Yeah.
So here you can see part of the round manure storage.
Yeah.
And he's put a roof over it. His poultry manure goes by stable cleaner into that pit. And then his beef manure, because the barn is on the right-hand side, gets moved to underneath this roofed area. And then with either I guess with a loader, gets put into the solid storage. And then at the other time of the year, he's got opportunity to put some round bales there or whatever. So if you go back one more slide. So some of the considerations, I'm going to say, the risk in this farm especially, but in a lot of livestock yards, it's the risk of manure going in concentrated flow getting to a watercourse. And that risk is there during rain events, but probably the biggest risk, especially with snow on yards and snow mixed with manure, is in that winter season. And so some of the considerations, some of them are easy, some of them are hard, but flow of water around the yard and the farmstead. So is there a way that water can be diverted so that rainwater doesn't have to go through the yard, or that it doesn't end up in the same flow area that the manure from the yard would go? How close is the water course? So, and that could be a catch basin, it could be a tile inlet, but how close is contaminated water before it gets into that water course? This is the big one. Is there an opportunity to divert rainwater from the existing roof area? So if you've got barns and you've got all that water going over the yard, is there an opportunity to divert that through eaves trough so that that water never gets to the yard, is diverted either underground or in a different direction? Can water be diverted from the yard itself, either by roofing the yard or roofing part of the yard? And I don't have good experience with that, so I'm just telling you that right up front. Is there an opportunity with a concrete pad, if there's a concrete pad there already, and maybe even if there isn't, to put in a barrier? And that barrier may be as simple as a row of straw bales, for example, just to slow down any of that water that's moving off the yard. The other one is where the yard is situated. Is there a vegetated area where that contaminated water can kind of meander instead of going on a straight path to the water course? Can it take a little bit more of a meandering path to get to that water? Vegetated flow paths, diverting, even something as simple as they have these tubes. They're called Filtrex tubes, and Mel, maybe you know what those are. But Filtrex tubes that they fill with, they're like socks. They're probably 8 inches around to 12 inches around, and they fill it with compost, or they fill it with wood chips, depending on what the use is. And then they will place those Filtrex tubes to try and divert water. So almost like a grassed waterway without the grass. Now the trick is you have to have more than one so that the water doesn't overflow and go around it. But that seems to be an opportunity that hasn't been used as much as we possibly could to divert some of that water so that it's not going in a straight line. And it would probably take some trial and error, but I think that would be one thing that you could do to try and slow down the water movement to a water course.
Yep.
And the picture here, it just shows some roof water being diverted, maybe a little bit, it's not fancy maybe, but it's being, yeah, it's being diverted. And then you've got the catch basin or whatever kind of tube that is, taking the water from the yard right to the liquid manure storage. This is a different farm. This isn't the same farm.
Yeah.
And can you go back one more picture?
Backwards?
I think it's one more. One more?
Nope.
No. Okay.
We're going forward.
Okay.
Is this it?
That one. Yeah, that's it. So this is that round manure storage that used to be a liquid pit.
Mhm.
And what they did when they built the storage over top of this is they took out one of the walls. They added a cement floor so that you've got a slope. And so you've got your liquids on the one side of the circle. And this is the wall that you see right in front of the picture. But then you've also got a sloped area where you can go right in with the spreader, fill up the spreader, and go back and forth. And so it's kind of unique. I'd never seen anything like it. Unique way of managing liquid and solid manure, basically. And this isn't all the liquids. They had a different pit for the liquid manure, but some of the liquids would accumulate in the one section of the storage.
But he must have got grants for it or not?
Some, yeah, some for sure. This was Grand River Conservation Authority was involved in this project, so yeah, there would have been some grant money.
Yeah, and there is grant money for a lot of, or at least for the southern part of the peninsula, for manure storage and eavesdropping and things like that that would divert water from the manure yards.
This is just a final slide. It's an advertisement. We were supposed to, in a couple weeks, be hosting the Manure Expo, but because of COVID, it got postponed to 1 year from now. So August 25th, 26th, at the Johnston Farm, just outside of Listowel, near Britain. We've got tours, we've got information sessions, we've got manure equipment demonstrations for solid and liquid. It's going to be a great tour. Or
now
a great
you have an
event.
extra year to plan it, so it'll be even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need
and all your contact details there. So if anyone has any follow-up questions, especially if you're just watching the recording of this, feel free to reach out.
Yep.
And I'll just close out by saying, on behalf of the Bruce Peninsula Biosphere Association, thanks so much for watching. And we do have a few more events coming up August 20th. At 4 p.m., well, I'll have more details. You just have to reach out to me. We're doing another convoy tour up to the northern part of the peninsula. August 28th, there's another webinar like this, just about soil compaction. If you're interested, sign up at ontariosoil.net. And then our last event for the summer is September 1st at 8 a.m. because we're trying to get someone from the UK. So it'll be a different time zone. So we're going to try to do a morning webinar and learn about how they do grazing in the UK. He's a Nuffield scholar, so he's actually seen grazing all around the world and how it happens. So there's my contact information. Just send me an email or give me a text or a call, and I'll get you the details to make sure you don't miss out on those events. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Stop recording now.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Good to meet you.